Welcome to tonight's program on Glencoe's unique modern architectural heritage. This is the first in a series of 3 programs that we're very pleased to be presenting in coordination with the Glencoe Preservation Commission. Particularly, I want to thank Peter Van Vechten for his involvement. The second program in the series, Glencoe's Architectural Top 10 Designers, Buildings, and Details, will be presented on June 9th by architect Peter Van Vechten, who is the chair of the Glencoe Preservation Commission. The third and final program in the series, Benefits of Landmarking Your House, will be presented on July 7th by Jessica Mavroganis and Erica Block of the Commission. And now about our presenter. Susan Benjamin is an architectural historian and author whose career spans over 40 years. She's managed her own firm in historic preservation, Benjamin Historic Certifications, LLC, since 2004, practicing with her associates in the Chicago area and beyond. She lives up in Highland Park. The firm researches and writes National Register nominations for individual buildings, historic districts, and boundary extensions. Recent nominations include 3500 North Lakeshore Drive in Chicago, the Adlai Stevenson Farm in Libertyville, and an updated nomination of the Lake Forest Historic District. Benjamin Historic Certifications also writes local landmark nominations for significant houses, hotels, apartment buildings, commercial buildings, designed landscapes, clubs, and schools, and it conducts historic surveys, and it works with property owners to acquire the Illinois property tax incentive freeze when a rehabilitation takes place. Susan is the author of several books. Her most recent one, co-authored with Michelangelo Sabatino, is Modern in the Middle, Chicago Houses, 1929 to 1975. It's a wonderful book, and yes, you may check it out from the library. Susan, welcome back to Glencoe Public Library. I'll let you take it from here.
Okay, thank you. You have to be a gymnast. Great. I need one. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I've done a lot of work in Glencoe over the years, and many friends here, and some I see in the audience, including Peter and Ellen, and I'm happy to really be able to talk about modern houses. And what I learned, if you look at the variety of houses on the screen, is that Glencoe really has a treasure trove of modern houses. And I was driving down driveways hoping that someone would take pity on an 80-year-old and not shoot her. But it was really interesting to see what I found and what Ellen drove me past. So I'm scratching the surface tonight, but I want to talk to you a little bit about what my drive about brought forth. But the concept is that there's just a lot here, and there's a lot that needs to be preserved, and people need to not make sure that they're on the radar screen to preserve these houses. Well, okay, Grace. Oh, I'm pressing the laser. That's why. It did. Okay, it worked. I think one of the most interesting things that I encountered when I started to think about with Peter, what did I want to talk about, is what community has really 3 significant subdivisions. And Glencoe does, beginning with Frank Lloyd Wright's subdivision in 1915, and through the Keck's work with 20-some houses that are just amazing modern passive solar houses. And finally, I was dying to talk about Greta Lederer. And beyond Greta, who was the builder, there was her architect, Milton Schwartz, not to be confused with Milton Schwartz, because there were 2 of them. And Milton Schwartz, that we're going to talk about tonight, is the architect who designed these wonderful houses. And the other Milton Schwartz designed high-rise, mid-rise buildings. So I was really excited to be able to talk about these subdivisions because I think there is more and more interest in the development of subdivision houses, which is what the 50s were all about. So Ravine Bluffs is the first, which I'm sure Peter will talk to you about in some depth. But just to say that, this subdivision created by Wright's friend and attorney that included the amazing bridge that is a reconstruction, but a perfect one, and the three sculptures at the entrances to the subdivision, and the 6 individual houses that were built on spec. And it's just really a special place with all the prairie characteristics that you see in the buildings. Second is Keck and Keck. And the Kecks designed this amazing subdivision that I don't know how many, were there 24 houses now? Good, because anything you can do, I would recommend strongly creating a historic district so that there is some oversight into what happens to these houses. They're pretty amazing. Forest Crest homes are simple, affordable, and that's how they were built by the developer Friedman. And anything you can do to preserve not just the houses, but the significance of the group of houses, because it creates the character of the neighborhood. You can see the locations, the dots, and I thank Peter for so much material he provided me with that I could share with you tonight. But you can see where they're located, the streets that they're on. How many people here live in one? In a house in the Keck subdivision? I'm probably going to ask the same question about Greta Lederer. So, I mean, I'm just really curious because it is so they are so significant. So just to say a little bit about Keck. Keck designed the House of Tomorrow at the Century of Progress. And at this exposition, there was a neighborhood where, I forget if it's 13 or 18, but they were houses created of materials that were either groundbreaking new kinds of products or traditional products like brick used in very interesting ways. You can visit the site where a few of them were taken down to in Beverly Shores. I requested on my birthday one year, what do you want to do? I'm going to go down to Beverly Shores to see those houses. So you'll see this one, which is pretty amazing. There's a book just on the houses. And of course, the pièce de résistance was the House of Tomorrow that was designed by Keck. And if that big door, it was for an airplane, if you wonder what that was. So the most interesting thing is what launched Keck, Fred Keck, on his mission to create passive solar energy, houses that were passive solar, utilized passive solar energy. What happened was that the workers in the House of Tomorrow, it was all a glass and steel frame building, were cooking inside it, like you would if you stood in a greenhouse in the sun. It had that effect. So he thought, we got to do something other than blinds and drapes to alleviate this and make it habitable. The second year, 1934, because the fair lasted 2 years, he designed the Crystal House, which is a steel frame with a glass envelope. And what's interesting, think of the year. I mean, 1934. If we're talking about Mies van der Rohe, we're talking early 50s. If we're talking about Philip Johnson, same time period. This was 1934, and it is truly a glass house. When you go down to Beverly Shores, you're going to see that, and I don't know much about this, but I've read that the House of Tomorrow, which is one of the homes that was taken down there, presumably by barge, and they're renovating it and restoring it, and that's a big deal. I'd like to go again and see what they're doing. So just to say a few words about Keck and passive solar energy. What he did studies. If you look at the study in the upper right-hand corner, he's tracing the azimuth of the sun. So in the winter, when the sun is very low, it can flood the interior of a house. In the summer, there are broad overhangs that prevent the sun from entering the house, so it's cool. And this has been used by others, like if any of you've been to the Schweiker house in Schaumburg, there's a room that is a passive, is heated and cooled by the way passive solar energy works. And one of his early houses I put in the right-hand corner is a Bruning house in Wilmette, where he did it. But let's talk about Glencoe and the subdivision. What are the characteristics to look for in a Keck house? Flat roof, broad overhangs that function as I described to you. And what he did with the flat roofs, which was not so successful, he created a situation where you could have a film of water on the roof and it would evaporate and cool the house. Well, it also leaked. So this was somewhat unsuccessful. But that was, a thought that he had. The most interesting characteristic, which he is really a telltale one of his houses, is the windows were large expanses of glass flanked by louvers that could cool the house in the summer because there were screens behind them, and you get a full expanse of glass to light the interiors. I don't have to tell you how cool these houses are. They're great. And then that was the subdivision, that we're talking about, but he also created some individual houses in Glencoe. And, this would be a great, I have a suggestion. We've done this a little bit in Highland Park, where you can put it on your phone and do a tour of these houses. And does that happen here or not? Not yet? Yeah, it's a great idea because this is the way to introduce people, and we're not using paper so much anymore, but it's a great way to do it. And to talk about Strawberry Hill. And that really gives me a great deal of pleasure to say a few words about Greta Letter and Milton Schwartz. This was the last substantial annexation in Glencoe. I believe it was about 50 acres. She also designed houses, individual houses throughout the community. I couldn't be doing this without Peter because he gave me a list of all her houses, and I'm sure we can, get that around. And a map to show where they were. Her architect of choice was a guy named Milton Schwartz that I mentioned to you. And she created really these incredible houses. They were called bi-levels and tri-levels, mostly tri-levels. Now we call them split levels. But they were a very efficient way to design a house because you get more for your buck. Within the cheaper, same footprint, stack the plumbing. I mean, there's all kinds of reasons that, this is a wonderful idea. So Ellen and I drove around Strawberry Hill and we talked about the houses that she designed, and they're pretty wonderful. This is an ad that I found for her work, and it is for Strawberry Hill, in fact. And she had advertised as Marion Hoyer, who was an interior, can you see okay? An interior designer that she used. And I thought, oh my gosh, that's interesting, because my in-laws, who lived at 470 Glendale in Winnetka, had a family room added to their house that they had designed by Marion Hoyer. And I was always been enamored with her work for a lot of reasons. I can go into that later. But she really did great things in the 50s. And so when Floss and Ed passed away, and I got to have some of her furniture and her ceramics, and we have a glass room in the back of our house that has pieces by her. She was a really wonderful designer. But this is one of the houses in Strawberry Hill that's a single family, a ranch house. I'm going to have to I can't read it from here. Can somebody read it? Jess, you want to read what it says if people can't see it? Because this cartoon is great.
Yes, I am a little homemaker. I'm in the construction business and I build small homes.
So that was Greta. And then she got plenty of publicity. Not plenty, she got some. But some of it was so, they highlighted that she was a significant builder and important in the industry and all that. But then, look at this, I can't believe this ad. The blonde, I mean, if somebody could write an article that says bald man business site, it's like crazy. And this is what Peter gave me, this map that shows a location in Strawberry Hill and other parts of the community. But I mean, I read somewhere she visits a site near Mink Coat. I mean, the whole thing is kind of like, you couldn't imagine somebody writing like that today because it's terrible. But she designed hundreds of houses. I have a number here somewhere, but it was, let's see if I can find it. Doesn't matter. Anyway, she designed hundreds of houses throughout Highland Park and Glencoe. And this is the list that Peter gave me that you can share with people or whatever. And it's pretty to see if details about houses, the particular houses. And they're really beautiful and wonderful to live in. I have a friend who lived in one for several years. But here's the curious fact, that look at the houses that she and her husband, Egon, lived in. They're traditional. The first one by C.A. Hemphill. Hemphill was a builder, and had an architect on staff named Ray Houlihan. And he was really good. He designed a lot of houses in Winnetka and throughout the North Shore, Kenilworth, I think on Sheridan Road at Kenilworth Avenue, some houses. So he was a substantial architect or builder, but with a talented architect on staff. And then he moved, and I learned this from Peter because I'd not seen this picture before, but the photo of the second house that he lived in, his wife lived, she and her husband lived in. And it described, that she was a builder and that his business. And this is how they lived. But she was a builder, and she was a very successful one, and one that deserves more recognition today. Milton Schwartz was her architect. And I just want to show you a few photographs of this house. He was really good. He lived in Barrington, and on the upper right-hand corner is his own house. Barrington had a house walk that I went on a few years ago, and I did get to see some of his other work, which is pretty interesting. But this house is wonderful. Friends of ours actually bought the house. It's just wonderful use of material with textured stone and artwork. And when you walk in, this really inviting front door with a big central knob, and then you think of the historic houses that have side lights, and this is the kind of the modern take on what a central door with side lights would look like. But look how the light floods the interior. I mean, it's really a special house. And here are a couple more images of that house that our friends are now rehabbing with this stone fireplace. I've never seen a fireplace like this. I mean, we all know that Frank Lloyd Wright, the fireplace was the hearth and the core of the home, but this is, on steroids. But well done. It's really beautiful. And then in the 50s, the way people lived, early on, everybody went and sat in their front porch. Well, after World War II, people hung out in their backyards and made barbecues and did all that. So these houses typically were a little more private from the street, but once you got in them, there were vast expanses of glass that open onto terraces or patios or pools or whatever. And this is an example of one. It's really nice and there's some really wonderful houses on this street, on Estate Lane. So it's really nice that Beth and Scott bought this property, and it's going to be wonderful and a fine rehabbed home for them. Edward Dart, he built some houses here, and I want to start with this slide because he's probably the most well-known, very, very talented. He was with the firm of Lobel, Schlossman, Bennett, and Dart, and they had designed shopping, the Old Orchard and Oak Brook, And Dart himself, as a designer, if you see a beautiful brick church, small scale, inviting, warm, kind of a building, it was very likely designed by Dart. And he was recognized. You know, I thought it'd be interesting to show you the architect's own homes if I had images. And these are 3 houses that Dart and his wife lived in. Dart had gone to Yale. When he was there, there were a lot of visiting professors like Walter Gropius and Louis Kahn and Marcel Breuer. So he learned from the best, and he translated it into really beautiful architecture. And he lived in 3 homes when he was in Barrington. The first one is a really simple 50s modern, what they could afford house, which was basically simple with a lot of glass. And then moved into a second house that was more complex and with different material, those stone hearth. And then the third house he lived in, sadly, has been demolished, but they remodeled a barn, and that was the house at the bottom. There's been a thesis on Dart. Susan Dart, his sister, wrote a book on him. All wonderful. So it would be, it's kind of a cool thing to have people who have written about these particular architects. And, this is another house, a house designed by Dart and I credit again Peter for this wonderful research in Glencoe. And this has a great story. Do you know this house? Lou Ansell was an attorney, and my father-in-law said, you have to see his house, because he knew that I loved this stuff. So he brought me over to Lou and Harriet's house, and they passed away, and I had seen it, and it went on the market. And so there was a couple who, look at the details. I mean, the doorway, the wrought iron work, the drainage is all with, there are no gutters and downspouts. It just drains into the earth. So they bought this house, and David thought, this is 2 lots on the lake. This is a good investment. And then Ellen said, I think I want to live in this house. So instead of selling or doing anything to make money, they made a life in it and created, this is the way it's intact. I mean, it's everything they did is basically rehab. They had those clear story windows had to be redone, but everything's the same, an incredible fireplace. And just to show you that it had a kitchen, a beautiful 50s kitchen, but it was buried so that, what it's like. People come over and you're cooking and you're, entertaining, and they're having a good time and you're stuck in the kitchen. So that's kind of the way it was. So they made that kitchen area into kind of a service area with storage and mudroom and that kind of stuff, and built this glass room on the back of the house, and that's the kitchen. And I think it's pretty amazing how those slatted doorways open and close. So you can kind of shut off the kitchen if you want to do it. But so they very much made the back of the house their own, and with this wonderful view of the lake. And it was published in Preservation Magazine by the National Trust. And that's Ellen and David sitting in the room next to the room with the view of the lake. It's a great story, and it's one you want to hear over and over again instead of about demolitions. William Decknatell. Now, he is somebody that is not particularly well known, but interesting. I did quite a lot of research on him when we did the book. This publication was written in the 1980s by John Zukowski, who was head of the architecture department at the Art Institute, and Betty Bloom, who did all the oral histories, many of the oral histories at the Art Institute. And this, when you think of the year, people didn't know who Paul Schweiker was. People didn't know who William Decknatell is. Yet Decknatell had a really interesting background. He went to the École des Beaux-Arts, so he's trained classically, came back, studied at Taliesin in 1932 when the School of the Soil that Wright created, and designed some really beautiful houses. But they're not, his work isn't well known. The most famous is a house called Windway, which I tried to get into, but the person who could have showed me was out of town or something. It was the home of Kohler Jr., not the founder of the Kohler Plumbing Company, but and he became governor of Wisconsin. But I wanted to show you pictures because it's really a very spectacular house that I wanted to see. And I had to put in a plug for Paul Schweiker because this booklet was part of an exhibition at the Art Institute, and it was on Decknatel and Schweiker. In Schaumburg, the Schweiker House, it's the only board I'm on or want to be on. And we have created a house museum, and anybody who wants to go there, I'll tell you all about it. And it's just a wonderful, beautiful icon of post-World War II architecture. Well, it was built before then, but it influenced architecture after World War II. So he went to, I mentioned Decknatel, studied at Taliesin, and that's just a photo of Taliesin. And I felt it was really important to show this image because, you know, we always credit Frank Lloyd Wright for the Prairie School and all those wonderful homes that he created. But then he was kind of persona non grata after he left his wife and kids and went off to Europe in 1909. And so he didn't really have much going on in Chicago. He was working in California, he was working on the Imperial Hotel. But in 1936, he was reborn and embraced all over the country. And he created something called the Usonian House, which is a play on United States of North America. And they're in Palo Alto, they're in Michigan, they're in Wisconsin. There are two in Chicago. One is the house in the Lloyd Lewis house. It's in our book. And it's a wonderful house. Chris Enck, if any of you know him, bought the house. The woman who lived there many years sold it. And he's working on it. And it's pretty special. But the first Usonian house that Wright designed was in 1936 in Madison, Wisconsin. And that I have been in. It's fabulous. Small, simple, but it's all about wood and glass and brick. Sometimes they're wood and glass and stone. And it's all about natural materials. And so Wright kept reinventing himself. And of course, at the same time, he was designing for Edgar Kaufman the Falling Water in Bear Run, Pennsylvania, and which he is looking immodestly at from the cover of Time magazine. And here, there's a beautiful house that I haven't been close to. It's on the beach and the lake here, and it is wood and glass. And you can see the influences of the Prairie School with the broad overhangs and the bands of windows. And this is an image from that article that I showed you. Another house that we drove by, Ellen and I drove by, there are more. I'm told you I'm kind of skimming the top, but there's also others at the top that are pretty wonderful. And this is a house that William Decknatel designed in 1953. He also, in addition to studying at the École des Beaux-Arts and having a classical training, having gone to Taliesin, he also went back to Europe and traveled a lot and exposed himself to the European modernism. Don Erickson, I fell in love with this house. Do you know this house on Brentwood? It is amazing. I mean, it's all I could do not to knock on the door and say, can I come see? Because it's just such a cool house. I can't tell you about it very much. I really don't know anything. It's just that it's cool. And Don Erickson did more houses than kind of we know about, scattered around. And I keep kind of discovering them. He favored pagoda roofs, and his work was romantic, expressionist. I'm trying to pick the right words I want to use, but it was not typical at all of what was being built in the 50s and 60s. And this house, if any of you know the people who live there and want to get me in, I would be real happy. And he's published a lot. Here's his picture. We couldn't get very close to the house on Wingate to see it, and it looks a little more subdued than the photos that I'm used to seeing of his work. But it is really pretty amazing. He designed this synagogue he's been published a lot, but it's kind of in journals, so you're not going to see him out there very much, but a really talented and interesting architect. Dennis Blair was Don Erickson's partner for many years. They met at Taliesin. I can't tell you, I'm going to end up saying this, I can't tell you very much about this because I can't, but I think this is maybe an opportunity, we're kind of scraping the surface of things, to learn more about these houses, because I really don't know, except there is, if you go online, there is material on Dennis Blair and there's material on Don Erickson, and not as much as on Darter Keck because they have gained more publicity over the years, but really cool architecture. Henry Dubin I do know something about, and you can see the house he designed here. I can't read from here what it says, but this is from Peter, thank you, to know more about it. But the house on the upper right was Henry Dubin's house. It's in Ravinia on Cedar Avenue, and the owners are renovating it and restoring it and rehabbing and doing whatever, landscaping it. It looks fantastic. And it was built in 1929, so it is really an early modern house. It was the first house in our book, and it really, it's stunning. It's small, it's modest. He had a fetish about fire, so it's steel construction. It's sometimes referred to as the battle deck house. But so he did some work. This is the only work he did in Glencoe. So you guys there's a lot more to learn than I'm able to tell you. I don't know a thing about this house, and I've never heard of Metcalf. And I didn't have time to check this out. But when Ellen and I were driving around, we saw these two houses, and if you're familiar with Mises' work at IIT, I don't mean the steel and glass pavilion like the Farnsworth house, but I mean just the simple blonde brick houses. These houses reminds me kind of the chapel at IIT. That's that blonde brick and glass. I mean, these are just really handsome modern houses. And I thought, I'm just going to show it anyway. I mean, first of all, there may be somebody in the audience who's going to say I live there or something. But they're really pretty terrific houses. The one on the right, I couldn't get in to see the one on the left. Jerry Wexler is a real estate developer. But talk about Tony Grunsfeld a bit. Tony, and I did know him, his father was Ernest Grunsfeld III, and Ernest Grunsfeld II designed the planetarium. And he was a very talented architect. He designed many, I think I'm not exaggerating if I say hundreds of houses on the North Shore. They're all kind of all over the place. And I saw on Peter's list that there was a house at 30th State Drive, and I just thought, what the heck? And I knew I was going up a private driveway. It was lined by trees. It did not look like some place that was very public, but I thought, as I said, they're not going to murder me. So, and I'm friendly. So I thought this was a really cool house that Tony designed. And his work kind of evolved, and he did some preservation stuff. I met him when he worked on a rehab in Highland Park. But he is, again, another player, and he did a lot of houses here. So I would say this is an opportunity to learn more about it. I.W. Colburn, fascinating, Lake Forest. I had to show you the house on the right because that's the house he lived in. And his work is much of his work is very expressionist. And he did a church in Waukegan. He did a few houses, one in Lake Forest, one in Winnetka, that has these projections and very kind of almost bizarre, but eccentric looking elements. But the house he did in Glencoe that I found, I mean, just literally putting it in my GPS and seeing what I was going to find, is really very restrained, but a really, really nice house. So something to look at. Booth and Nagel, very well-known architectural firm. They split off in the 80s, and it became Nagel Hartray, and I forget who Larry partnered with. Jim passed away. Larry is still active. He's got a practice here and a practice in Palm Springs. And, another kind of, you can trace the development of the modern house by looking at these homes in Glencoe too. I hardly know. I tried to find James Schnurr. I have no clue who he is, but it didn't matter, because this was this very nice house. Footlick and Rose, I did find material on, and if you go, it's pretty amazing. If you go online, you can kind of pick stuff up. Let's see what I wrote about Footlick and Rose. Graduate of the University of Illinois, member of the AIA. Says thousands of homes. I don't know where. I know a few. I know he did some in Wilmette. And so, they're kind of out there. And the idea is and this house by James Schnurr, and I did try to find out who he was, and I got nowhere. But there are other ways, with Ancestry.com, you can find people. And look at obituaries, they're a huge source of information. But in the time I had, I didn't find anything. But I thought the more important thing is to show you photos of these houses by some that are really highly acknowledged, significant architects, and by some, who knows? But they're worth cataloging, and they're worth talking about, because these are the kinds of buildings that go down with barely a whimper, and it's important that they be preserved. Yeah, I have no idea. When Ellen and I were driving around, I said, I like that house. I think I'll take a picture. So that's kind of how it went. And I don't know what these are. I don't know anything about them, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it's just that if they're good architecture, human scale, compatible with the neighborhood, worth paying attention to. And one thing I wanted to point out is that we've looked at a lot of houses, and what you're seeing is, when you see houses that are published, it's all about, remember the guy, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous? Not here. The people that were building these post-war houses were generally progressive thinkers, like Ben Rose was a fabric designer. It was his, he had he collected cars, and that was Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It was his auto museum that they ran the car through, so I couldn't not show you that. But I mean, he was a fabric designer. At the time he and Fran wanted to build a house, and I knew them. I should tell you a funny story. So I said to Fran once, I said, how could you let them run a car through the glass? She said they promised they'd wash the windows, which would do it for me too. But he was a fabric designer. Marching with Dr. King, he was an attorney. Can't think of his name. Ralph Hellstein, I should know it. He was actually a fraternity brother of my father's. I mean, there's just like one, and I'm not from here, so it was like 1 degree of separation. He marched with Martin Luther King. He was his friend. He used to go and consult with him. He wasn't wealthy. But he was a progressive thinker, so he hired Bertrand Goldberg to design their home, which is nothing but slabs and cylinders. And it's a pretty amazing concrete house in Hyde Park. And the house in the middle, Rosalie Dixler ran Ravinia Nursery School, and her husband was a prominent pediatrician. So, I mean, these are not grand houses for grand people. These were people who were progressive thinkers, and they hired progressive architects. But I think that's an important point about these modernist houses. They're livable, they're beautiful, And they're not necessarily, sometimes they're grand, but usually not. Well, I had to do this. This is our house. We live on Marion Avenue. It's a redwood house. That was the only thing that you don't see is the mailbox because it was photoshopped off when it was put in our book. But it's a cool house. Larry Perkins designed it in 1941, around the same time as he was designing Crow Island. And he used to come over with his wife, and we'd talk. And it was really kind of cool, that we got to know him a little bit. And that's the interior of our house. And it's small, and I worry about it because I don't want somebody to tear it down. It's a landmark in Highland Park. And you got to work at that, too, to make sure that people stick to their guns and preserve landmark houses, that the bodies that review changes and demolitions. So I walk the walk, talk the talk, love the way I live in it. And the book that Michelangelo and I wrote is the book I always wanted to write. And it was really a lot of fun. And to visit these houses was great. And you got a great critical mass of them here. So I think that a lot more to do, a lot more to learn. Thanks. I'm happy to answer any question about anything. Yeah.
Was the construction over the garage a failed concept? It seemed like it was a mid-century modern concept that was ongoing for a while. You showed some of those, especially with the sunken garage, and then the house above with the tri-level. But was that a concept that was somewhat disfavored?
Well, I'll answer garages the best I can. The car became very popular around in the 20s, and then came the Depression, and then came the war. But the car was a prized object, and people want to show off their cars. So they built carports. There's my car. Look at me, I've got this wonderful car. And that was kind of typical. But then they began to build garages in the front too, and sometimes they were two-story. Sometimes they had rooms over them. Think about the old houses, 19th century houses with the coach houses. They were in back, with the horse, and you didn't want the horse living in your garage, So I mean, it was a different kind of a concept that was adapting to what was popular, and to this day, I think people like to show off their cars, and people like cars, which is fine. In terms of over the garage, it was a handy place to build a room. My husband's bedroom was over the garage later. I mean, he added the room. So I think it's pretty interesting to trace how people viewed the car. And I kind of like the idea of the carport because it's pretty cool. Yeah.
The other thing is, this weather used to be really cold in the winter, and to keep a car outside when you can get it out of the snow in the street.
And heat it?
Makes good sense.
Yeah, and plug it in today. All of that stuff. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's much more sensible to have a garage than a carport. But at first, that was kind of a thing. And you think of Frank Lloyd Wright's houses too. The 30s, these Usonian houses that I've showed you with the carports and all. Yeah, that's true. It's sort of evolved. Anybody else? Yeah.
Show a picture of the house on the beach. Here, I never met. Who's the architect of that?
William Decknatell. I've never been in the house. I think at some point we wanted to open it for something, and they were, I respect that. People are reluctant to, maybe. It's empty?
It was.
Oh. But boy, it's a cool house.
But it is very, very, very cool. Very small.
Yeah.
It had one of these kitchens. You made a point about the other kitchen. The kitchen was like about 7 or 8 feet wide, maybe, and it went down the entire north length of the house. But it was, probably nothing there. It was blocked down. there's Tony Grunsfeld built some houses on shoreline, not off of the harbor, near the lake down there. So some of his later houses are up there. That lives inside of us.
Like many architects, his style evolved, you know, or you could see from Ed Dart when I showed you the 3 houses he lived in, you know, just different worldview as he lived, had more money and more successful and could do more. But Tony was a very good architect, and he designed some really cool houses. I particularly like the ones that he designed in the 50s, the real early stuff. I think.
Probably later on, almost at the end of his career.
Yeah.
The question about the covered garage raises this question. The majority of the houses that you've shown have flat roofs.
Correct.
That's the prairie style. The problem that strikes me intellectually is snow here, and we used to, of course, have a lot more snow recently, but that's heavy. And structurally, I ask whether that's a smart thing to do for architects to have in Chicago a flat roof.
Well, I defer to Jess, who's an engineer, or Peter, who's an architect, to answer those questions, because, I mean, I know that a flat roof isn't necessarily flat. I mean, it, you know, it has some pitch, but you still, it could gather snow and they tend to leak. Although we have our garage has a flat roof and it's never leaked. We just make sure the roof works, you know, but could you, Peter? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm going to sit while you answer, if you don't mind.
I'll make it really brief. You know, flat roofs have been around a long time, and we've all seen a foot or 2 of snow on top.
Peter, you have to stand up so we can hear you.
Okay. Flat roofs have been, my name's Peter Van Becken. I'm an architect, and I'm going to answer this, and then I'm going to excuse myself to go to a meeting next door. Flat roofs have been around a long time. Flat roofs have been around a really long time and have accommodated a lot of snow. For well over 100 years. We live in a 110-year-old house with a flat roof. Part of the issue is understanding that the span is not as great as what we might think of today. And so you're talking about not a span this great with wood, but maybe 10, 12 feet. 14 feet. And so for wood, that's not a big deal. Now, if you double that, that's a big deal, and you get a lot of creaking, and then you get movement, and then you get water. So we get this question all the time, and we've never had an issue with snow, either on the house or the garage. What we have had issues with is when we have these terrible storms that break off limbs that like to invade. Okay? Nature finds a way. So, flat roofs versus a slope roof, guess what? 110 years ago, modern houses had both of those. Look, go through the right subdivision, there's flat and sloped. And so, it's easy to say it's all flat roofs because we're thinking about what Susan just showed, all these brilliant examples of flat. But part of that was stylistic, part of it was economy. So coming out of the war, there was an effort to build as many houses as we could. There was a strong need. And so the idea of building economically was right up there in importance. What all these guys did was take that functional need, but then inspire it with some creativity and spirit to give us something that's truly memorable. And today we value that. When you look at some of the other examples of this type of work, not in Glencoe maybe somewhere else, you look at it and you kind of, When you look at these, there's something about it that grabs our eye. And I like to say there's a sense of art and a sense of craft all there. It's not machine made. But maybe you could, if you walk down the street today, you look at it and you I do. But when you look at these houses, there's something that is a little bit more about it that touches us. And for me, I find that really valuable. And I cry when things go away. for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
I wanted to comment when you talked about the overhangs and passive solar.
Yeah, great.
And as if we had invented that, and that kind of goes back in the tropics, probably several millennia at least in terms
Yeah.
of design of their homes.
I think that, do I need to use the mic?
There was a comment about native styles that are with these overhangs, passive solar heating. They've been doing it for millennia. Elsewhere in what we used to call the primitive world.
I don't know enough to comment very much on that, but it's probably more the case that it got popularized. I mean, he had this occasion where his workers on the House of Tomorrow were cooking inside of a glass box, or octagon in this case, and so, maybe that means we need to be thinking about something. And, it'd be really great to get into his head. We can see the drawings he did, we can see the houses he designed, but can we see what books he was looking at? It's just like you have a relative and they're not there anymore and you want to say, why didn't I ask him, And that's kind of the thing that I'm sure that somewhere there, it's taking something new and reinterpreting it and utilizing it with modern materials in this case, something like that. But and who really believed in it. He was drawing these, making these drawings that showed how it works. I've seen it work, like at the Schweiker house. It's really interesting. There's this one room, it faces south, it's got a broad overhang, and I've been there. I'm there all the time, and so I've seen what is it like in the winter, what is it like in the fall, what is it like in the summer, where is the sun, where is the wind, there's convection going with the air going out clear story windows opposite this overhang. It's pretty fascinating what they were doing. We can tell, why, but what was he looking at? Because I'm sure you're right. Even if it was only intuitively, yeah, we'll put an overhang on there. It'll keep the sun out. So it was pretty neat stuff. Yeah.
About 8 or 10 years ago, the Art Institute offered a field trip to the Keck House neighborhood. And we actually drove downtown to the Art Institute, met the bus, we took out here and then we went back. But it was a really interesting way to get into the houses. They showed us 3 or 4 where the owners had, graciously agreed to let them be shown.
Nice.
And I don't know if they still do that, but it was a really nice opportunity.
Well, I think anything that you can do to call attention to their significance. If somebody says, oh, I want to buy the lot, and it's a little house, I want a big house, and all that kind of stuff. I mean, there needs to be an understanding of why this mix of houses by Keck, they're a little different, but they're kind of a sameness in terms of detailing and scale and all that. But they need to understand why this is so important. What is it that this is unusual? And I kept thinking about, what am I going to talk about tonight? And what I really came down on was people have to understand, that they're simple, modest, affordable houses by distinguished architects and builders that need to be paid attention to before whole neighborhoods are decimated. So anything that you can do, whether it's a walking tour on your phone, which is pretty cool actually, or get an article. Bob Seidman, who lives here and is a friend of mine, he and I have been writing for Record North Shore. They asked if we would do that, except Bob and I have not written about houses. I guess we could, we just haven't kind of wanted to get into what that involves. So we've written about churches and synagogues and bridges and all kinds of stuff. But anything that you can do, and that's how we feel about the Schweiker House in Schaumburg, which is kind of a, it's kind of a hike to go out there. But it's not. It's 45 minutes. I know, because I go there all the time. But it is so special, and you got to call attention to these places. I mean, the reason I got involved with the Schweiker House was because the Water Rec District, which owned property next door, wanted to take the land and demolish the house. So what happened? The resident was a woman named Martiel Langsdorff. Alex worked on the Manhattan Project and then went to Washington to plead with Truman not to use the bomb. And Martiel was a very distinguished artist who designed the Doomsday Clock. So these are the people that lived in that house. And Martiel was bound and determined that that house was not going to be demolished. And we just worked it. I don't know how else to put it, but we got it listed on the register. We got a bunch of publicity. The village stepped in and they bought it, which was huge. And you've done that kind of thing. And it's just, you have to get it all out there. So now we've got a house museum and we're trying to raise money, which is really hard. But, other than that, it's very popular. It was voted, among the 100 best sites in Chicago to visit. And it's way out there, in subdivision land, which was farmland when it was built.
Just an interesting comment on what you said about Martiel's Langsdorff. His wife actually developed the Doomsday Clock.
That's what I said.
Did you say that?
I did. But he was for the cover of the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, and Martiel was an artist. They both met in St. Louis, and so she designed that. And some of her paintings were very much inspired by synapses and scientific things. And I'm going to put in a plug. We're having a party. It's called the Peony Party, and it's because Martiel every year had she and Alex, then when he passed away, she had a party every year when the peonies started to bloom. It's $100. If you're interested, I'll happily forward you a link. It's really fun. And you get to see the house, which is fabulous. And it's the 30th of May, and it's a wonderful, wonderful commemoration both to Paul Schweiker, who built it and lived there, and then to Martiel and Alex, who are really cool, special, wonderful people. So I can't help myself because I want to see it be a success. But there's a lot here, right in your front door that's worth recognizing and saving.